Hey, it's Grady at Twin Creek Audio, and I canceled all of my plugin subscriptions. Today's video is a little bit different than my normal videos about analog gear. Today I'm going to talk about plugin subscriptions, and I called the video Plugin Poverty because I think a lot of us are experiencing that. These plugins cost a lot of money, and they're taking money out of your bank account every month. And personally, I'm not sure that's a very cost-effective way for most musicians to produce music. However, there are some pros to plugin subscriptions, such as the low initial cost, which removes the entry barrier for certain really expensive plugins. You also get access to all of a company's plugins for one monthly fee. So those are kind of the pros. There are also a lot of cons. One of the main ones being that a subscription over time can be more expensive than just purchasing the plugin. And you also don't own that plugin, you're just renting it basically, which is how most software is done these days anyway. You're also dependent on that service. For example, you have a project you've mixed with your plugin subscription plugins, and then you cancel that subscription because you need the money. Now when you open your project, all those plugins don't work, and you have to remove them from all the tracks in your project and potentially use something else that's either one of the included plugins with your DAW or a plugin that you've already paid for. Also with subscriptions, you have a lot of plugins, so that can lead to decision paralysis, where you have so many plugins that you're spending more time searching through all the plugins from your subscription than actually recording and mixing. And I'm not even going to mention potential compatibility issues with older operating systems and older DAW software. The long-term cost of most plugin subscriptions is probably the biggest reason why I canceled all my plugin subscriptions. So let's take a look at a document that I put together that kind of illustrates how plugin subscription can be one of the highest costs for your production. So I want to quickly take a look at a document that I put together. This is a profit and loss statement for a music album streaming and download release. Now this is based on actual data for an artist that I worked with. And in fact, the streaming royalties and digital sales, this is not just one album release, this is probably 4 different albums that were released on streaming services by this artist. We can see that the streaming royalties came out to $17.84 in a year's time. The digital sales were only $20. And of course, this is not necessarily a popular artist, but he probably should be, because the stuff is really good. But this may be typical of what you can expect if you're going to release your music out into the world on streaming services and on Bandcamp, which is what this number came from in the first place. That was Bandcamp sales. So that's our total profit for a year was $37.84 when you look at that. Now let's look at expenses. The production costs were 0 because we worked in my studio, and it's a personal friend of mine, and I love his music, so I did the production on this stuff for this amount, which is 0. Our artwork and design, he did that himself, so that number is also 0. So we saved a lot of money right there. Marketing and promotion. This is stuff like Facebook boosting and digital advertising to promote the album releases. Then we have the distribution fee, which was $80 a year in order to distribute this music to the streaming platforms. And of course, Bandcamp doesn't cost anything, so there's no number for the download sales fees. Administrative costs, this is things like email and website hosting, which also could be part of promotion because this is being used to promote the music that we released. So here we come to plugin subscription, and it's in bold because that's what this video is about. And what I've done here is I've used one of the less expensive subscriptions that's out there in the industry, which is $16.67 a month, and that comes out to $200.04 a year. Of course, you can get a discount on this subscription if you pay it all up front, but who's got the money for that? A lot of us don't. But you can tell by looking at this expense chart that the largest expense of all of this was the plugin subscription. Now let's come down here and look at the profit and loss summary. So the total revenue was $37.84. Total expenses for the year was $430.04. That's a net loss of $392.20 a year. And since we didn't have any production costs or artwork and design costs, the next year those costs are going to remain roughly the same. Now again, this may not be typical for every artist out there. I certainly hope a lot of you are making a lot more on music you're releasing than we did. I think this is pretty similar to what you can expect if you're releasing your first album to streaming services, other than your distribution fees may be a little bit lower right here if you're only putting out one album instead of 4 or 5 like we did. I'm not great at math or anything, so this is all kind of an estimate, but I think this is actually close enough to reality that it proves my point. This plugin subscription was still the highest cost and therefore led to the largest loss of any of the expenses here when releasing an album on digital platforms, which is how most music is being released nowadays. So what are some ways that we can get away from the cost of these subscriptions? Well, the first one is to use the stock plugins with your DAW, and also using a DAW that doesn't have a subscription cost. Something like Reaper, which is what I use. There are also tons of free plugins out there. Personally, I like the Air Windows plugins. They have a very basic user interface, but they sound great. And what are we really interested in with a plugin? We're interested in the sound, right? So is a pretty graphic user interface really that important, or is it more important than the sound? Probably not. Another way to avoid plugin subscription costs and still have all the effects and processing that you want is to do what I do, and that's to invest in analog gear. Analog gear is a much better investment because you can resell analog gear. And it's pretty hard to resell a plugin, although that does depend on company policy. But analog gear will either keep its value or, in some cases, gain value while you own it. And you can sell it and recoup some of the cost. Now, I'm not saying plugin subscriptions are all bad. For certain types of users, they can be very beneficial. They're also beneficial for trying out a company's plugins. You can subscribe for a couple of months and trial the plugins, and if that company offers a one-time fee to buy that plugin, you can figure out which ones you want to invest your money in. They're also pretty good for people that value constant updates and want the latest, greatest software and want to make sure that the plugins work with their up-to-date operating systems. Subscriptions can also be good for people who like to try new things frequently. But I would say that plugin subscriptions are probably best for people that are actually making money off the music they produce, and not as good of a value for those of us that are recording in our home studios and releasing music on streaming services where we don't make very much money. Personally, I feel like recording and mixing in your home studio is becoming less and less affordable, and a lot of that is due to these software subscription costs. You can let me know what you think in the comments below. I'll also have another video coming up about the cost of hardware for a home studio and how that's becoming unaffordable as well. Going back to my recommendations to invest in analog hardware, later this week I'll be making a video about my new consulting service that will allow me a better and more streamlined way to help you with your analog gear questions. And that should provide even more value when you purchase analog gear. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and got some good information out of it, and I appreciate everyone for watching my videos. I hope each and every one of you out there has an excellent and wonderful day, night, evening, weekend, weekday, hour, minute, second, nanosecond, whatever it is you're having. Have a good one. Thanks so much for watching.